Welcome, everybody. Is everybody in? All right, welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming to our Tubman Talk today. I believe we have just one more for the semester, so this is second to the last this semester. Thank you all. Today we have Dr. Sayan Dey, but before we introduce him, we're just going to quickly go over the York University land acknowledgement, because we are virtually at York University right now. And so we have to acknowledge the land upon which we virtually stand. York University recognizes that many indigenous nations have long-lasting relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Tikoronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to of the Dish with One Spoon, One Spoon Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So welcome, everybody. Today we have a talk titled Afro-Indian Creole Cultures in Gujarat, a case study on the Zikr songs and Dhamaal dances of the Siddi community by Dr. Sayan Dey. Dr. Sayan Dey grew up in Kolkata, West Bengal, and is currently working as a postdoctoral fellow at WIT Center for Diversity Studies in University of Witwatersrand. He's also a faculty fellow of the Harriet Tubman Institute at York University, Canada. Some of his published books are History and Myth, Postcolonial Dimensions by Vernon Press in 2020, Myths, Myths, Histories, and Decolonial Interventions, A Planetary Resistance, and Green Academia Towards Eco-Friendly Education Systems. His areas of research interest are post-colonial studies, decolonial studies, critical race theories, food, humanities, and critical diversity literacy. Everybody, please welcome Dr. Sayan Dey. Thank you very much for coming to give us the talk today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Saleva, for this warm introduction. And also, I wish to extend my humble gratitude to Rebecca, Prof. Saleva, to the Harriet Tubman Institute and York University for having me on a virtual presentation today. What I'm going to basically talk about today is a fragment of my current postdoctoral project that I'm doing as a part of my presence at the WIT Center for Diversity Studies in the University of Witwatersrand. And the topic of my presentation is, as already shared by Prof. Saleva, that it is about Afro-Indian Creole cultures in the state of Gujarat, in the Indian state of Gujarat, which is basically, and it's important to acknowledge the geographical location of the state of Gujarat, because it plays a very crucial role in the history of the evolution of the African diaspora community in India. And so Gujarat is located on the western coast, in the upper side of the western coast of India, and it is actually right across the Indian Ocean. If you stand in Gujarat and if you try to see right across the Indian Ocean, parallelly we can see Eastern African nations like Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and other Eastern African nations. And it's very important to mention this locationalities because this locationality specifically played a very crucial role in the movements of the Eastern Africans from Eastern Africa to India at different points of time, which obviously I will be gradually unpacking in due course of my presentation. And it is also important to note that the African diaspora community in India is popularly known as the Siddis. So in the course of my lecture, I would be using the term Siddis. So so that in case you don't get confused, so I just thought of mentioning it right at the beginning that it is the term Siddis that are specifically used to refer to the African diaspora community in India. Now, before going into these very details about their musical practices, about their dance practices, and about, most importantly, the question that why do I recognize such practices as Afro-Indian Creole practices? Let us have a brief overview about how did the African diaspora community emerged in India. Now, on the basis of the available historical documents, what we see is widely the Africans came in India, who are now currently a part of the African diaspora. Their ancestors came to India widely over two periods of time. One was the time in the 13th century when Islamic invasion took place through Central Asia, and they came in India mostly from parts of Gujarat and other parts of West India. They entered India, and at that point of time, they brought a lot of Eastern African slaves from in their ships, and they transferred a lot of Eastern African slaves to India. And apart from the Eastern African slaves, there were also a lot of musicians. At a later stage of time, there were a lot of musicians, traders, then independent businessmen who arrived from Eastern Africa post-Islamic invasion to India. So this is how precisely we see that mostly the Eastern Africans who arrived in India through Gujarat and widely settled in Gujarat actually mostly took place at the time of Islamic invasion. And this is one of the major reason why we see that the Siddi community that currently resides in Gujarat, they identify themselves as Muslims. Now, the second group of Africans who came to India was at the time of Portuguese colonization. And they mostly arrived from central and southern parts of South Africa. Central and the southern parts of Africa, also a lot from South Africa, Zimbabwe, and other parts of Southern Africa. Now, a very interesting aspect of these African people coming from the southern parts and the central part of Africa is they were again mostly brought as slaves by the Portuguese, and they mostly settled in the southern Indian states of Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Today, a majority of these Africans who came along with the Portuguese colonizers, they are mostly found in Maharashtra as well. I forgot to mention the name of Maharashtra. Mostly found in the state of Maharashtra, in the state of Karnataka, and in the state of Telangana. Now, we don't have Andhra Pradesh as a whole state. We have two separate states. So mostly in Telangana. If we go to the city of Hyderabad, if we go in different parts of the city of Bangalore, if we go in different parts of Mumbai and other parts of Maharashtra, we see there's a good number of Siddi community people existing there. And in terms of, again, it's very important to mention their religious identity as well. A majority, not all, but a majority of the cities in these parts of the country, that is in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and in Telangana, they mostly identify themselves as Christians. Again, in Hyderabad, we have a few Muslim cities as well. In Karnataka, we have a very few Hindu cities as well, but mostly they identify themselves as Christians. Now, this is a very brief overview about how did these communities arrive in India. Now, obviously, once they arrived in India, they underwent multiple levels of cultural transformations, linguistic transformations, social transformations, and various other transformations by intermixing with the various local communities there. They started, establishing cultural exchanges, political exchanges. And in this way, what happened gradually with the passage of time, if we look at the Siddi community, as on the one side, they made every effort to, preserve and practice their ancestral cultures and traditions. On the other side, they were also, to a certain extent, they encountered compulsion also to a certain extent by their own choice in order to adjust and value the local cultures and traditions. They adopted many elements of the local cultures and traditions. And that is what actually gave birth to a lot of interwoven cultures and traditions, what I basically identify in my title as the Afro-Indian Creole. That is what I basically term as the Afro-Indian Creole, where on the one side, their ancestral cultures and traditions gets interwoven with a lot of these local cultures and traditions. And we can see in different patterns, for example, let's say in terms of musical practices, in terms of dance practices. Briefly in Karnataka, we can look at in terms of culinary practices as well, in terms of artworks. Let's say in Karnataka, there is this culture of, patchwork quilt, making patchwork quilts in Karnataka by the Siddi women. We see a lot of these trends in different parts of Eastern Africa and West Africa and Central Africa as well, where patchwork quilts is quite famous. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically focus on two elements. One is the musical and dance practices of the Siddi community, and specifically in the region of Gujarat. Now, along with my presentation, I also have a documentary as well. And actually, what I will do is I will not completely present the documentary to you, just for the understanding the context of my presentation. What I'll do is I will present bits and pieces from the documentary, but I'm very happy to share the link of the documentary in the in the chat box, so that at your own ease, if you wish to just a moment, yeah, if you wish to take a look at the documentary at your leisure time, just feel free to do that. So I'm just pasting the link in the chat box now. Basically what happened when the Siddis arrived, and a lot of these elements what I'm going to share with you are not all available in the textbooks. And those who are a bit aware of the Siddi community in India, they also might be aware that a lot has already been written about the Siddi communities from different perspectives, through different lenses. But still a lot needs to be unpacked, because unfortunately, many of the writings about the Siddi community that we see actually has also been a sort of very, generalized, over romanticized and a tokenized representation of the communities. Either they have been represented in a very celebratory lens, as if they have no crisis in their existence, just to hide the daily experiences of racialization that they undergo, or else they have been present in a very dehumanizing, stigmatizing lens, as if these communities are stripped of their cultures and traditions, and in a way reconfiguring and reinventing that language of colonization, that language of colonial grammar, that these communities exist in darkness and we, the mainstream communities, need to take up them into the light. So there have been many of such, polarized presentations of the community, which is also very problematic. So my research in a way also interrogates these elements of polarization as well, through looking deeply into their cultures and traditions. So a lot of narratives that I'm going to share in relation to the music and dance has to do also with their oral perspectives that they share, that they have shared at the time of my field research that I conducted with them last year. And so many of them may not be available in books, but are just integral part of their oral narratives that have been traveling from one generation to another. Now, when the Siddis arrived in Gujarat, obviously, when they arrived in Gujarat, majority of them were Muslims. And after arriving in Gujarat, the interesting part that happened was, either choice or mainly by compulsion, they have to adopt Islam, as their religion to survive at that point of time. Now, but what they did is they also wanted to remain associated, as I already mentioned, to their ancestral spiritual cultures and traditions. And that's why a lot of these Siddi spiritual figures that we come across has their association centrally or rooted in the spiritual, many traditional and indigenous spiritual beliefs in different parts of Eastern Africa. To unpack in a very specific senses, for instance, if you ever come to Gujarat and if you ever visit the Siddi community people, and if you ask them about their spiritual beliefs and practices, about their spiritual ancestors, some of the names that they put up are like Baba Gaur, Mai Mishra. I'm just typing the names here so that you're able to understand and follow me. So some of the names I've put here are Baba Gaur, Mai Mishra, Baba Habash, and many other, such figures. They follow them as their ancestors. Now, how do they relate? The question is obviously now, how do they relate that these spiritual ancestors that they believe in have a connection to eastern parts of Africa? Now, for that, we have to deeply look into the Siddi folklores that exist. And if we look, according to the Siddi folklores, they believe in the Sufi cult that is also widely found in different parts of Sudan and other parts of Eastern and Northern and Central Africa as well. Now, if you look at one of these names, Baba Habash. Now, this word Habash has to do a lot with this particular word called Habsh or Habshi. Now, Habsh was actually the ancient name of Ethiopia. Habsh was the ancient name of Ethiopia, and this name, Baba Habash, Baba is actually a sort of respect to this whole connotation of Baba, or in India, we often use the word Baba, Baba as a way of representing or a way of showing our respect to the male spiritual figures, and Ma as the respect to the motherly female spiritual figures. From there, the word Mai comes, that is Mai Misra. Now, according to the Siddi spiritual folklores, Mai Mishra, Baba Gaur, and Baba Habash, they, along with 4 other siblings, they arrived in Gujarat long term around 13th century or later on around 14th century. The exact date is not known. It varies from different folklores. And they arrived by a boat from Ethiopia, through the Abyssinian Valley, and then through the ocean. And then they arrived in the coast of Gujarat, which is today known as the Kuda. It's in the Kuda coast of Gujarat they arrived. And as the folklore says, now after arriving in the evening, they were actually feeling extremely tired. They were exhausted by the journey. And they just thought that prior to moving into the inlands, they will actually, take rest, around the seashores for that particular evening. Now, what happens? Mai Mishra is the only woman amongst the siblings, the sister. She stays in the tent. But rest of the brothers, they just, for a sake of relaxation, they just go out for a walk along the coastal line. And now why I'm narrating this story, the relevance, I will tell you how the Siddi folklores also has inter-religious connections as well. And inter-religious creolization as well. So they go basically, there's the 6 brothers, they go out to take a walk along the coastline. What happens while they take a walk along the coastline? There's a small hilly elevation. It is still there in the coast. Now what happens? There is a temple of a traditional goddess. a traditional sea goddess who are worshipped by the existing Hindu communities there in that particular coastline. Now, according to the folklore, one of their brothers is taken hostage by the Hindu goddess. Now, when the other brothers request the Hindu goddess to release their brother, the Hindu goddess says, no, I am very alone here, and I want one of your brothers, to be my playmate. And they keep on requesting, but the Hindu goddess is very much adamant. She is not going to release the brother. Then this, the five brothers, obviously one has been taken hostage by the Hindu goddess, comes back and complains to my Mishra, and then she says, let me go and try. She also goes there, requests the Hindu goddess. The Hindu goddess is adamant, no, I am alone here. I want one of your brothers as a playmate. Then my Mishra gives the Hindu goddess a very alternate proposal. She says that, okay, I give you an alternate proposal. Please release my brother. Instead of my brother, I will be your company. I will give you company forever. And I will stay in close association with you forever. And whosoever devotees comes to us, we will bless them together and look at their problems together. Now, this is how, one thing needs to be observed, that if you look at the shrines of my Mishra, they are always located near the sea coast, just along the coastal lines, and right beside this temple of the Hindu goddess. And an interesting part of the Siddi folklore is also important to mention, that their worship patterns, as on the one side, they have the local ancestral worship patterns, local dance worship patterns, they also adopted a lot of these traditional worshipping patterns from the Hindus as well. So when they have their traditional religious festivals, like one is Urs, we say, Urs is actually the celebration of the death anniversary of the spiritual leaders, which is very common amongst the Sufi Muslims across the world. When they have their Urs, the Urs are not just attended by the Muslims, but also they're also widely attended by the Hindu folks in Gujarat and across the country. So this also shows the inter-religious connections of the Siddis, that despite identifying themselves as a sect of Sufi Muslims, they also have these close interactions with the Hindu communities locally as well, and also obviously of the African ancestral traditions. Now, this is one sort of creolization that we locate. The other sort of creolization is obviously here, what creolizing element we can locate is how they associate their spiritual association with these so-called Eastern African spiritual ancestors. And then also at the same time, they also adopt the various local cultures and traditions of Gujarat or widely in India. The other form of creolization that we also widely see is in terms of the songs, the religious songs, which are known as Zikrs, and which is also a part of my title. Now, Zikrs are spiritual songs which are specifically sung in Islam for their spiritual ancestors. And what is interesting about many of the Zikrs, now it is important to mention that there are, now when they perform their religious rituals, the Siddi community, they widely do it in two ways. One is in the sitting form, they sit and sing a song, and one is the dancing form. Okay, now where they dance and sing, where a group will sit and sing, but also there will be a simultaneously group who will dance with the songs. Now there are two different patterns, and I will in some time I will showcase through my documentary as well. Now the interesting part of the lyrics, now I'm drawing my attention towards the lyrics of the songs. The interesting part of the lyrics is that many of these lyrics, obviously they are in Hindi language, they are in the Urdu language, they are in the Gujarati language, but also very interestingly, which has become very rare now, is in the Swahili Creole language. Now, Swahili Creole is not exactly as the standard Swahili that is spoken in Kenya, Tanzania, or other parts of Eastern Africa, but there are certain words that are used in this particular in the Zikrs, which has a lot of similarity, with the standard Swahili language. Now, let me actually give you a brief example to actually show you. Is my screen visible to all of you? Okay, excellent. I will just give you one small example. Now, there are many of the Zikrs I have documented during my field research last year with all the Siddi community members there in Gujarat. And there are many of the Zikrs I have noted down, but one small Zikr here is this particular Zikr. It says Simle, 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 Le Simpaya, Simle, Le Simpaya. Now, this is again a Zikr in the Swahili Creole where I would like to draw your attention towards this one word, Simle. Now, this word Simle may not be available in a standard form of Swahili language, Swahili people. And this word Simle has combined where Gujarat, with the Gujarat Urdu words and the Hindi words and then the Swahili words to give this birth to this particular word called Simle. Let me actually give you another example. Let me just go up. Maybe I will. Yes. So if you look at this particular Zikr, which says that Salmini, 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 Miskini, Salmini, Ya Malungu. And this continues twice, and then we have Haji Lele, Haji Lele, Allah Allah, Haji Lele, Haji Lele, Ya Malungu. And then, it continues in this way with some variations in words. Now here, some of the Swahili Creole words that are used is, first of all, Salmini. Salmini is a way to say hello to all. Miskini is a Swahili Creole word which refers to someone who is poor, financially incapable of supporting oneself. Malungo is actually very interesting to note that in different parts of Africa, in Southern Africa and Eastern Africa and other parts of Africa as well, there is a tradition of playing one-string instruments. And Malungo is a very traditional one-string instrument which is still played by a lot of Siddi elders in Gujarat. Again, it has become very rare, but the elderly Siddis, in order to preserve their old cultures and traditions, their ancestral cultures and traditions, continue to adhere to a lot of these musical instruments. And one of them is Malungu, which is made with goat skin. And it is a single string musical instrument. If you go to all these Siddi shrines, the majority of the Siddi shrines, they will have at least one piece of Malungu, and they preserve it as is ancestral knowledge. So this is another element, what we see as a part of, this Afro-Indian Creole being represented in their cultures and traditions. And in terms of language, the first we saw is in terms of how they identify their ancestors in connection to the local Gujarati cultures and traditions, not only of the Muslims, but also of the Hindus as well. And here we briefly see the Afro-Indian Creole also gets reflected in terms of the usage of their languages as well, many of which are Swahili Creole words. There, obviously, 10, 15 years back, there were Siddi elders who unfortunately have transitioned and are no more. They were quite fluent in talking in the standard Swahili, but unfortunately, that did not get transferred into the other community members. So these Swahili words have undergone multiple levels of creolization and are still undergoing multiple levels of creolization. And these exist only exclusively through Zikrs now. Now the part of Afro-Indian creolization, which actually would be the final part, and where while talking about that, I would be talking about, I will be showcasing my documentary as well in bits and parts. But just to briefly introduce here, specifically, I'm going to talk about the element of dhamals. Now, what does this word dhamal means, which is also there in the, in the title of my presentation, is the word dhamal means is a form of dance form that the Siddis have conceptualized over different generations, where even in the videos you will see that their dance movements have a lot of similarities with the dance movements of different indigenous communities across, Africa. Eastern Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, the way they move their hands, the feet, the bodies, the facial expressions, we see a lot of these similarities. And also before that, one thing I would like to mention, that the Zikr that I was talking about in the context of the Siddi community in Gujarat, similarly, if at the various of the Sufi Muslim community in Sudan, there also we see that they have this tradition of dhikr. What we say as zikr, they call it as dhikr. And it is very similar to what the Siddis do in terms of the dance, in terms of the music, in terms of the food they offer, in terms of the drums that they play, in terms of the single string instruments that they play, has a lot of these identities and overlaps. So this is another strong point that shows how and in what ways the Siddis identify, their ancestry from different parts of Eastern Africa. Now, yes, coming to the Dhamals, what we see in the Dhamals is there are two types of Dhamals. Now, as I was mentioning in terms of Zikrs, Zikrs are actually sung at the time of Dhamals as well. One is known as Dhamal in the sitting position. That is referred to as Baithaki Dhamal. Now, before I move further of the description, I want to showcase how Baithaki Dhamals are performed. All right. Let me just go a bit ahead with my documentary.
There's no sound.
Is it not audible?
No, there's no volume.
No,
There's
it's
sound.
not.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it's audible.
No, I thought I was the only one who couldn't hear.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me replay.
Okay.
Otherwise, I don't know. Do I need to do any sort of settings?
I think there is a way to share screen with audio. So perhaps if you stop sharing your screen and then try to share again, there's an option that you can click.
Okay, is it in the more? Should I just
when you click share screen, there should be like a little arrow with sharing.
Okay, let me do that. Yeah, there is a share screen. I think I go to the okay, in share screen, yeah, I can see that arrow, but it just gives me options for how many participants can at the same time or who can share.
So let's see. I'll try it. So when you click on like the green share screen button, then a screen opens up with
Yeah.
all the options for sharing. And the bottom left.
Oh, there is a share
there is a-
sound. Oh,
Okay, yeah, there you got it.
now let me do it. I don't think, okay, perfect. Just a moment, let me go back. Can you all hear now?
Yes, it's good now.
Yes, it's working. now.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so obviously it continues in this way. Now, why I gave this example is this is one of the examples of Baithaki Dhamaal, or the Dhamaal that is performed in the sitting position. The word Baithaki means in the sitting position. Let me actually stop screen sharing so that I have an access to the chat box as well. It's called the Baithaki Dhamaal. So what you see is, you know, the Siddi, the one who is performing is actually Farooq Siddi, and he actually is, you know, playing that particular drum that you see. It's referred to as a musindo. Musindo is again a traditional Eastern African drum that they have adopted and received from the knowledges of their Eastern African ancestors. So this is referred to actually as musindo. Musindo is a very interesting drum that you see here, and it's played, you know, on the both the sides. And if this particular Dhamaal is being actually sung in the Hindi language, Hindi and a mix of Urdu language. But then if we go through the meaning of the lyrics, it says that Baba mere var se aaye. It means my father, that is Baba Gaur, my spiritual father, Baba Gaur, has come from very far off lands, across the ocean, across the forests, across, you know, the mountains, and then have come to us to bless us. And we as Siddhis, we as a Siddhi community, we are so lucky to receive their blessings, who have come from such far off lands. So this mentioning, you know, this whole sort of trans-oceanic identity that the Siddhis always have gets very well strongly represented through these lyrics, you know, that how they, you know, remember their spiritual ancestors, you know, how they have come from across forests and lands and the you know, and the oceans to Gujarat to come and bless them and to look at their, you know, all the challenges that they encounter in their daily life. And then you have all these different ways, you know, different elements of their African ancestry that gets so subtly played out in terms of musical instruments, in terms of acknowledging, in terms of lyrics. Another form of Dhamaal is referred to as the dance Dhamaal. Now, let me tell you, this is a bit complex. Dance Dhamaal are again of two types. Now, one type of dance Dhamaal we will just see in some time. One type of dance Dhamaal is performed in the religious context, which we are going to see in due course of time. Another form of dance Dhamaal is there, which is performed in the usual general cultural context. For example, it can be in the time of marriage. It can be just be a celebration in one evening or together. May not have a religious context. And both have different lyrics. At the same time, both of the movements are very different. For instance, let me talk to you about very briefly that that particular dance Dhamaal, which is performed outside the religious context as a general cultural context. There you will see it is mostly performed by the Siddi community who are located near the Gir forest. The Gir forest, there is a, sorry for the typo error. It's Gir forest, which is located in Gujarat. Now, in this particular region of Gir forest, what we see, they live very closely to the wild animals and the natural environment. And their dance movements, sort of present a lot of those movements of the animals in the forest. And it narrates stories that how these communities live closely with the animals and the birds and the plants in the forest, and how they respect each other. They get very close to each other. How do they warn each other in spaces? And all of these dance movements in terms of imitating the lion, in terms of imitating the birds, in terms of imitating the plants, and these as their close association with the forest, the nature, and also they have strongly adopted from their Eastern African ancestors. And the other form of dance is actually what I'm going to showcase as the dance Dhamaal very briefly here. Just a moment. I think I forgot to do the sound sharing. Okay, the sound sharing is already there. In case you can't hear, just please raise your hands, okay? Because I'm unable to access the chat box when I'm screen sharing, so please feel free to let me know. This is just a brief part that I showed of this very perspective of dance Dhamaal that they have. Usually, it is important to note that some of the differences between this sitting way of performing the Dhamaals and the dancing ways of performing the Dhamaals is actually interesting, because usually in the sitting pattern of singing the Zikrs, the focus is more on the lyrics, and obviously they play the musindo, but they will always try to make sure that the sound or the noise of the musical instruments doesn't overpower the lyrics, which is exactly opposite in case of dance Dhamaal. In fact, obviously I've shared the full documentary with you, but also if you look at my that particular YouTube archive, Roots and Roots, there are also separate videos, where you will see of dance Dhamaals, where you will see videos of Baithaki Dhamaals, that is a seating, the sitting version of the Dhamaals. Dhamaal specifically being performed by women, because there are also very interesting gender dynamics, because women mostly do the dhamals, which are meant for their mother spiritual ancestor, Mai Mishra. Men do mostly the dhamals, which are meant for their paternal spiritual ancestors like Baba, Gaur, Siddi, Bilal. And for instance, in this dhamal that you saw, where people are doing some slow dance movements, which gradually gets very frenzied with time. That is the process where they will play the drums, and and I think you saw that man, swinging these things in his hands. It is again a very traditional Eastern African instrument, which the Siddis believe that they have received through the ocean, and it is called Kanga Misri. Kanga Misri, that is, that particular thing is called Kanga Misri, which consists of 108 stones inside. 108 stones, and those stones are specifically collected from the ocean. So you see every time how fascinatingly they have this extremely interesting, complex, but entangled connection with so many spiritual elements, not only of the mainstream spiritual elements, not only of the human spiritual elements, but also the natural spiritual elements. And that is what makes this whole entanglement, this whole diversity, makes this Siddi community so distinctive and so interesting across different parts of India. And before closing, and then obviously I would like to look forward to your feedback and questions, I would like to mention one thing, that for today, the Siddi community undergoes multiple levels of marginalization and racialization. Like, for instance, these people, when they, a very simple example I'm citing, when they go to the bank to open up a bank account, despite the fact that they all have the documents of being a proper Indian citizen, whatever documents they have, they're just being harassed in the banks, that you look like foreigners, you look like Africans, you don't belong to us, you're presenting fake documents, etc. They're being like very deliberately harassed, despite the people in the bank also know that they are officially citizens of India. In terms of going to study in schools, they undergo multiple levels of racialization because of their skin skin color, in terms of their anatomical structure, in terms of their hairstyles. They're consistently subjected to ridicule. And for them, they believe that remaining to a very prominent way of resisting these ridicules, they do it in a very invitational, warm and strong manner. And for them, these cultural practices, knowing these cultural practices, transferring these cultural practices from one generation to another, plays a very, very important role for these communities to resist these forms of racism, to invite people into their community spaces, cultural spaces, and let them know about their cultures and traditions. Some of the positive elements that we can really locate in terms of their resistance is how these Siddi dances, especially the Dhamaal dances, now are traveling abroad, through different ICS, for example, Indian Council of Historical Research scholarships, or through different cultural organizations in India who fund these communities across Gujarat and obviously in other parts of India as well, where they travel to different dance festivals, musical festivals across the world, and present their traditional dances, present their traditional songs to a global audience. Gradually, things are changing, but a lot more need to be done, because especially a majority of the people in India still, even people in Gujarat, they are unaware that the Siddi community exists. Even if they're aware, they hardly know about how they trace their ancestry. Obviously, there are many things to share, many things to talk, but I think I will stop here. And thank you so much once again for giving me the space and listening to me. And I'm obviously very interested to listen to your feedback, reflections, and questions. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dey. So we're gonna have a Q&A session. Excuse me. Please, excuse me, I apologize. feel like I have something stuck. But anyways, thank you so much for such an informative talk. If there's anyone here who has a question or a comment, please raise your hand so that I can call you, and then you can speak. So we're just going to go in that order. And so it's one question or comment, and then a response from Dr. Dey, and then the next person. Tanya?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dey. That was a very fascinating presentation. And there are all kinds of questions I have, but I will ask you two of them. One is this word Siddi. Is that connected to a particular community in East Africa? I'm wondering whether it was a identifying marker which the community developed in India after moving to India, or is it an African word that they brought with them, and what meaning it has? So that was one. And the other one is you were talking about the racism that they face in India. And so I'm wondering, in connection with that, how does the community sustain itself economically? Like, what kind of work do they do? What kind of economic base do they have? And also socially, have they over the generations, over epochs or decades, hundreds of years, have they developed any connections with the kind of indigenous Indian communities, any particular caste perhaps, or indigenous groups in India, maybe the tribal groups in India and so on. So is there some connection with an Indian group, or are they forced to live basically by them on their own in a segregated way?
Thank you so much, Tanya, for this wonderful set of questions. Coming to the first question, actually, the word Siddi that they trace is an Arabic word. And if you look at the meaning of the word Siddi, that is from Arabic word called Siddi. Like, let me just, sometimes this spelling is used, sometimes they also use this spelling as well, like both the spellings more or less are used. Now, the word Siddi in Arabic is actually a very respectful word. It means that who is the captain of a vessel, the one who leads the ship and captains the ship. Now, an interesting thing, it is important to note that even the Siddi slaves who came in India and they got these element of name, now they eventually were named by the Islamic rulers as Siddis, because with the passage of time, they realized that many of these Siddis are capable of working, let's say, as treasure guards, as palace guards, as being musicians. And so then they were freed from their slavery, and then they were given all these positions in the palace. And gradually they came to be known as Siddis because it was a sort of acknowledgement of the works that they can do. And then later on, many Siddis emerge as musicians, as army men. One of the Siddi, famous Siddi, though not from Gujarat, but in Hyderabad, is known as Malik Ambar, who later on established, a whole empire in Maharashtra. He was the king in one of the empires of Maharashtra. This is one thing. Now, let me tell you something interesting. If you go to Gujarat and look at this surname, let's say name will be like Ahmed Siddi Makwa. Now, in Tanzania, there is a village named Makwa. Then Farooq Siddi Murima. In Kenya, Tanzania border, there is a village named Murima. So, through these surnames, also they weave their ancestry. And, many researchers, very prominent researchers like, Amy Kathleen Jairus-Boy, who is at the UCLA and who primarily works with the Siddi musicians, the music of the Siddis. Amy Kathleen's late husband was also very prominently working on the musical. They also organized a lot of these fundings and fellowships to whatever extent has been possible to take the Siddi communities to those villages. And they've interacted with these people to trace their ancestry, to meet their probably, some way, somewhat. Concretely, it may not be possible to find the relationalities, but at least somewhere, somewhat, they can figure out their roots and relations. So that is what I have for your first question. The second question, in terms of the sustenance, I think that's another very important question. And the sad part is a majority of the cities have to survive doing odd jobs. Majority of the cities, there are a few cities who are well-established businessmen, who are lawyers, who are engineers, who are doctors, who are working in the banks as, in good posts in the banks, but they are very few in numbers, very few in numbers. Still, in Gujarat, there are quite a few cities who follow the traditional ancestral pattern of singing songs and begging. That was once what their ancestors did when the Islamic, the Islamic empire was there, functioning as mendicants, going around and begging, for their sustenance. Still, a lot of them follow that pattern, very unfortunately. So that's why, as I ended my presentation, that a lot needs to be done. And I think as a researcher, what at my end, the least can I do for them? As a researcher, with respect to my limited resources, whatever resources I have, is to create a historical, understanding of these communities, to let the world know that these communities exist. And if ever we are going to know about these communities, work about these communities, let us also keep this in mind, that at least we try to help or engage with these communities as much as possible from our end, so that they don't feel like we go inside and collect data and come back and we have our own share, so that they are also very an active part of our existence. And the other element of this is, the question of racism. The point about, what we see now in India, I mean, just to let people know, those who are not aware, that we have these categories of general category. These are officially structured categories: general category, scheduled caste category, scheduled tribes category, other backward caste categories, and all these sorts of categories through which, these certain communities, based on their historical origin, cultural representation, and marginalization, are put into these specific categories. And they, get certain, financial benefits, official benefits, and other sorts of benefits, which are obviously questionable and a different debate altogether. But yeah, that is the official categories. Now, these Siddi communities, they are placed under the scheduled tribes category, ST categories. But I mean, in reality, what they basically face is all about marginalization, especially if you just look at the localities they occupy. Like if you go to the Gir forest region in the cities, they're totally placed in the geographical margins, widely disconnected from the main city spaces. If you even look at the cities in Ahmedabad, they're right in the center of the city, but sort of closeted from the rest of the so-called, civilization, and they're treated as one of those margins. So, marginalization and racialization of these communities goes hand in hand.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really fascinating.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other question or comment?
Yes, what?
Do we have
I
any
can
other?
ask another question if nobody else has.
Okay, Professor.
But I don't want to monopolize.
It's okay. It's okay. We still have a bit of time.
Yeah, let's see if anybody else has.
Any other questions or comments, please? I think it's back to you, Professor Des.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can say anything about their identity and sense of belonging. So you talked about the Creole, Indian, African kind of culture, but how do they see themselves? How do they talk? How do they represent themselves? Do they see themselves as Indians or Africans or both?
Yes, I think that's another interesting question because now there is a mixed approach in terms of their identities. And that mixed approach has to do primarily with two factors. One is the generation of people. Now, if you look at the elder generation of the Siddi community, they are very particular about this fact that they proudly embrace their Creole identity. They're very particular about this fact that we need to respect our ancestral traditions on the one side, African ancestral traditions on the one side. On the other side, we need to embrace the local cultures and traditions that has been historically a part of the growth and evolution in India. But with this new young generation of people, obviously efforts are being made. In fact, if you just look at the last part of my documentary, the third Baitaki Dhamaal of my documentary, you will see a lot of young children are singing along with the elderly people. And that is how they try to sensitize the younger generation about their ancestral values and traditions. They do, but they are very keen to identify themselves as completely Indians. They don't want to adhere themselves as Africans because they are so afraid of this whole marginalization and the racialization, because they've already seen the experiences that their parents, their grandparents have been undergoing for years through this particular identity. So they want to completely identify themselves as, Indians. They don't want to deliberately, they don't want to learn Swahili, despite the fact that elders are trying to encourage them that you should go back and learn your ancestral language. It is nothing wrong, but they are very desperate not to learn Swahili. They want to, learn English, Hindi or Gujarati, so that, they are being identified as Indians in the community and they are no more racialized. So, you see this sort of fracture in terms of, and the possible these reasons why these communities, some of them adhere to this creolized elements, but some of them are very reluctant to identify themselves as Creoles.
Thank you. Yeah, that it sounds like there's this real contradiction and contestation,
Absolutely,
generationally, as you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's also strategic. Because
it's also very strategic. Yes.
I mean, the younger
Totally.
generation, they want to adhere to the Indian identity because they see that they need to be they need to be integrated into the Indian kind of social milieu. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And also one more. Oh, sorry, Prof.
It's fine.
Sorry,
It's
Prof.
fine. Continue.
No. I was just wanting to share that one more perspective also I wanted to share. Why personally in the context of India, particularly, I felt that, Siddi community has contributed widely in transforming the culture scape of not only Gujarat or in all of these states, but also widely in India, especially the fact that currently they travel across India to perform in Sufi music festivals and different dance festivals, very prominent dance festivals across India to perform. Because, it also shows in the current, right-wing political state of India, where we see more and more fractures between the different religious communities, especially of the Hindus and the Muslims. The Siddi folklore itself is a strong form of resistance, to bridge these sort of gaps. There is another very interesting story, apart from the first story that I shared about my Mishra and the Hindu goddess near the coastal lines. If you go, there is a big market in Ahmedabad, which are centrally run by the cities. Basically the cities own every shop there. You see a clothes shop, a jewelry shop, an essence shop or whatever, it's all with the cities. In that market, there is a temple of goddess Lakshmi. Now, according to Hindu mythology, goddess Lakshmi is regarded as the goddess of wealth and financial well-being, and so now goddess Lakshmi is traditionally a Hindu goddess, but that whole temple is taken care exclusively by the Siddi Muslims, and it has been happening for generations, not today or yesterday. So this is another very example, how there's this whole Siddi folklore is so deeply entangled with different religious and spiritual practices, which again sets a wonderful example for India in the contemporary scenario as well. And a majority, and nowhere in the books you find these stories of folklores. They're just orally documented. They just travel from one generation to another, and unfortunately just remains restricted within these communities.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Day. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was very informative, and we definitely learned a lot about all that's going on in your research. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming today. So thank you all. And one more thing. Oh yes, thank you. I was just gonna ask if you wanted to share your information. If anyone felt the need to reach out to you, his email address is in the chat room. One more thing, we are, and we've made this announcement continuously over the semester, and I just wanted to reiterate, we are launching a journal at the Tubman Institute. So I'd like to encourage everyone who is, if you're writing something and thinking of a great place to submit your journal, for peer review, please think of the Tubman Institute's journal. And then there's one more Tubman talk for the semester. That's going to be next week, Thursday at 2:30. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, and thank you so much once again, all of you, for such fascinating engagements. Thanks a lot. Please stay tuned.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
so much, Dr. Day.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay with. Bye.